Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francesca Graham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DOD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started.
Okay, and welcome to the first episode of a new-ish format we're going to introduce, kind of a inside the actor studio of the Star Chamber, if you will. And in this format, Francesca Graham and I will just kind of wax poetic about some thoughts, some experiences, some of our DOD Times Redacted articles. That's the Foundation's newsletter. And perhaps just put you to sleep. And I thought that the first episode in this mini format, which might not be mini at all, an appropriate topic would be to introduce ourselves, introduce myself, introduce the foundation, kind of talk about what we do, who we are, how we got to this point, how I got to this point, and what we're doing now and in the future. And it's important for background to kind of talk about the dual systems of justice in our uniformed services, so military and Coast Guard. You've got the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I think a lot of people are more familiar with that system, where you have courts martial and trial by jury of peers, and it's a adversarial system that closely mirrors a lot of the processes and rights and due process afforded to those accused of a crime in the civil system. But then you have this thing called the administrative system of justice, and really it's the administrative system of air quotes justice, because not only does it not afford service members, uniformed service members, justice, it doesn't mirror any American system of justice, any Sixth Amendment Brady rights, those afforded to civilian counterparts. There are very few checks and balances. There is little to no accountability for those who circumvent due process or just usurp it outright. It really is a kangaroo court, more appropriately, a Star Chamber. And if you want to learn more about the heritage of the Star Chamber, where that came from, that is a early Star Chamber podcast episode you can listen to. But in essence, it's a entity in which one person, thing, organization, etc., plays the role of judge, jury, and executioner. And you can see the inherent flaws from that system from the outset, which is if the command, let's say, has determined you are guilty, then any investigation, inquiry, etc., overseen by that command or entities subordinate to that command, like the Inspector General system, are likely going to fulfill a foregone conclusion, and sadly, that's oftentimes the case. And it's important to note that within this administrative system, there are severe ramifications for the service member potentially, to include losing one's security clearance, losing one's job, being dismissed by the military, under other than honorable categorizations. It's potentially lifelong personal and professional impacting, and is done completely outside of what you and I know to be any kind of American form of justice. And one of the elements of this kangaroo court is the Inspector General system. So the IG is, on paper, at least in theory, it exists to vet complaints, carry out investigations, etc., in an independent, objective manner. But the reality, unfortunately, is quite divergent from the theory for a myriad of reasons, which we'll get into in other podcast episodes, other articles, etc. I know this firsthand because I was an Inspector General in the Air Force at the installation level from 2013 to 2016. I was the wing commander's quote-unquote independent watchdog. And really, I think the quote from the regulation is eyes and ears of the commander, which is mutually exclusive from independence, in my opinion. But from that experience of those 3 years, I saw how easily manipulated, coerced, skewed, tainted, etc. the Inspector General system could be. One of the main issues was that my boss, in other words, the person who veritably held my career in their hands, was the commander of the installation that I was responsible for inspecting and members investigating. So right there you see an inherent conflict of interest, and I saw it play out many times when I would present my findings, etc., to that commander, who didn't agree based on nothing more than personal bias and opinions, and overrule the objective work that I and my team had done. I watched as alleged victims of reprisal were gaslit and made pariahs and besmirched even before the investigation had begun, an investigation that I was tasked with overseeing. So it was in those 3 years where I started to get a peek of the flaws of the system, but I wasn't really totally aware of all of its shortcomings until I was a member of the Defense Intelligence Agency and a victim of 2 reprisals towards the end of my tenure there in 2019 and 2020. And the very long saga short of that is that I raised concerns of several issues happening within our organization, to include dereliction of duty, toxic work environment, etc. And the retaliation, retribution, and reprisal was swift and unrecoverable. And that was the catalyst for a years-long journey for me, where I ventured through this dysfunctional and corrupt systems of redress, to include the chain of command and especially Inspector General system. I saw how just wrought with failure it was at every level, starting with the fact that inspectors were not well trained and many were inept and incompetent. Many, as I kind of talked to before, were under the thumb of a chain of command looking to fulfill a foregone conclusion or influence the investigation or stall it in some way. I saw how there was very little transparency in the system, how there were very few checks and balances on the investigative system, how when inspectors general failed to apply the correct standards of proof or burden of proof, there was zero accountability and zero real oversight, despite the fact that there were several entities such as Congress and committees and councils put in place to do that very thing. In short, I realized what an abject failure the Inspector General system within the military and later Coast Guard was. But aside from that, and more salient to this discussion, I think, is one of the shortcomings, which is really a shortcoming by design, I'd argue, is that when you are a complainant or a subject, whatever the case may be, in this administrative realm, you are isolated. And again, I think that's by design. You are not afforded legal counsel or advisement. Many of your friends, colleagues, peers stray from being associated with you for fear of being caught in the collateral damage frag pattern. No one trains you or instructs you on how to navigate the system or what your rights or entitlements are. You're very much put out to pasture, and you're left to square off against the juggernaut of the United States' Department of Defense or Homeland Security, as the lawyers say, pro se, which is to say, completely on your own. And one of the realizations I made during my personal whistleblower journey was exactly that, was I was helped by no one. And that was difficult, but one of the more difficult pills to swallow was that I was told before the process had started that people like the Inspector General, like my chain of command, like my services representatives, were my advocates and my allies. And that was unequivocally not the case. And I saw it play out in real time, because as soon as I raised my concerns of wrongdoing, I saw how all those aforementioned entities circled the wagons, and instead of advocating and assisting me, they only were interested in one thing, and that was protecting themselves, the institution, and its leadership. And so the years-long saga of my personal story you can listen to in another podcast. It's a two-part podcast about the Defense Intelligence Agency scandal. But more germane to this discussion is the lessons I learned, the shortcomings I identified in the system, and then how I endeavored to address them. And it really all started with me saying, you know what, if I am seeing this and I am struggling navigating the system, a system that I was trained in, a system that I knew, having been a former Inspector General, then surely there are hundreds, if not thousands, of service members in the military and the Coast Guard that are facing these exact same challenges. Marry that with the fact that they don't have the know-how or education or wherewithal in how to navigate this very daunting process. And that really was the genesis of the foundation, which was just a beacon of hope, if you will, just to be an ally or mentor or advisor for these people going through these potentially career-impacting processes in which not only did they not know how to navigate the system, they were squaring off against a military or Coast Guard institution that was very determined to squash them and or their complaint. And of that, the Walk the Talk Foundation was born. And I named it Walk the Talk because I saw consistently throughout my personal experience that the government did not walk the talk. There was a lot of superfluous platitudes about doing the right thing and reporting wrong being your duty and you'd be protected. But quite honestly, at the end of the day, it was all bullshit. The only thing that the government was concerned about was protecting itself. And you raising a concern of wrongdoing was, in essence, taken as being or questioning the sanctity of the institution, questioning a commander's authority, and they reacted just as you expect they would, given that perception. Hence the foundation's namesake of Walk the Talk. The ultimate aim is to get our military and Coast Guard to actually do what they say they're going to do, which is to encourage a whistleblower to come forward to protect them as they should be by law, and which in reality they aren't. And while we are endeavoring to reach that goal, at the same time, be an advisor, mentor, ally, friend to those complainants or subjects going through an administrative inquiry, investigation, or process. And that's really the dual role of the foundation and what it's become, which is, on one hand, we advocate for better legislation, for market reform in a system that's totally broken. And at the same time, we, our team of advisors and volunteers, work with individual clients seeking recourse, redress, restitution from a military and Coast Guard that are very averse to providing it. And that was started just after my retirement in February of 2022. And it really just started as me talking to people and trying to educate them and arm them with the know-how to give them at least a fighting chance, while at the same time validating that what they were feeling and what they were experiencing was an actual thing. And that's one of the tactics that the military and Coast Guard use in this battle, if you will, is they make you, as the complainant or subject, the target of whatever is occurring. They make you start to believe you're the one that's wrong. It's the very definition of victim blaming. And one of the side benefits of the foundation from a client perspective is that they come to us and we say, yes, what you're doing is correct and what's happening to you is wrong. And that's an important first step that many people don't receive, having not gotten counsel or advisement. And from there, the business, I say business in a loose sense, began to grow, mainly because of the overwhelming need for our services. And that's indicative of an administrative justice system, again, air quotes, in dire need of repair. And over the last 3 years, we've expanded, especially in both roles, really, from the legislative advocacy side, getting laws passed or pushing for better, more robust laws for the protection of the service member, but also from the individual client standpoint. We're recording this in April of 2025, so just over 3 years in operation, and we've advised in some form or fashion 450 current or former service members that have all gone through, although the cases differ in the variables and the details, they also share a lot of similar commonalities, which I can best boil down to: they were told it was their duty to report a wrongdoing, whether they witnessed it or they were a victim of it. They weren't protected, and then they were gaslit, retaliated, victims of reprisal, and paid or are paying a significant cost, all for doing, in essence, the right thing. And that's fundamentally wrong. And it's something I'm very passionate about, having seen both sides of this corruption, been the dealer of it, I have to admit, now looking back as a former Inspector General, and then being a victim of it. And then going through every tier of possible redress from the local level all the way up to and including Congress, and seeing it fail me, and identifying the shortcomings throughout that. And what a travesty it is, especially given the fact that we do this to the honorably serving 1% of the country that have raised their hand and willingly sacrifice so much. The unfortunate reality of all this is that they sacrifice things they shouldn't, such as rights and due process, which are constitutionally derived and should be afforded to every American citizen, including and especially those wearing the uniform. But the sad reality is they're not. And that's where we come into play. How we help and what we do is oftentimes case dependent, but from a general sense, the foundation exists, at least for the individual centric part of it, to advise and educate, validate, and be an ally in the individual's fight against the machine, which is our Departments of Defense and Homeland Security. And in the 3 years we've been in operation, aside from the numerous clients and advisees we've encountered and advised and come across and assisted, we've grown significantly from one advisor, me, to a now 501c3. It's an IRS-approved nonprofit with a team of 6 advisors, 12 volunteers, and again, over 450 plus cases under our belt. Indicative of 2 things. Number 1, the incredible work the Walk the Talk Foundation team does. And number 2, the dire need for real reform within our uniformed services, for actual protections, for a government that really walks the talk. So that's a little bit about the genesis of the foundation, a little background as to my story and where I came from and how I went from Air Force officer and fighter pilot to president of a foundation advocating for service members' rights and advising those going through, like we say, the arduous process of an administrative investigation in the uniformed services. I hope you garnered a little bit more information, background, clarification, edification from this episode. And if nothing else, perhaps it just relaxed you and put you to sleep. But regardless, I appreciate you following along. Appreciate you being a supporter of the Walk the Talk Foundation. And we'll talk to you next episode. Bye.
Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.